Behind the glamour of Golden Age Hollywood lay a brutal truth. Many of its brightest stars were drowning in addiction. Fame gave them riches and adoration, but it also amplified their pain. These 17 classic actors and actresses had the world at their feet, yet lost everything to drugs, alcohol, or both. This is the haunting legacy of stars whose talent burned bright, then burned out far too soon. 1. Judy Garland. Judy Garland was Hollywood's songbird, a beacon of vulnerability wrapped in a golden voice. She will forever be remembered as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, skipping down the yellow brick road. But off-screen, Judy's life was a harrowing cycle of addiction, emotional collapse, and exploitation. Pushed into the spotlight from the age of 2, Garland was molded by MGM into a marketable product. Executives gave her amphetamines to keep her awake and barbiturates to make her sleep. This pharmaceutical routine began when she was just a teenager, laying the groundwork for lifelong dependency. The pressure to maintain a slim figure and bubbly public persona drove her into emotional instability. By her 20s, she was spiraling. Garland endured multiple hospitalizations, nervous breakdowns, and career setbacks. She was fired from several productions, including Annie Get Your Gun, for her erratic behavior. Despite earning millions, she died penniless, hounded by debt, and haunted by broken relationships. Her final years were a tragic coda to a life spent trying to please a system that used her up. In 1969, she died of a barbiturate overdose in a London apartment. She was just 47. Garland's story is one of extraordinary talent shackled by addiction, and a cautionary tale of what Hollywood can do to the souls it shines its brightest light upon. 2. Robert Walker. Robert Walker had the charm of a boy next door, but behind the innocent smile was a tormented man undone by alcohol and heartbreak. His performance as the chilling Bruno Anthony in Alfred Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train is legendary. Yet few know that it was one of his final roles before addiction took his life. Walker's Hollywood journey began with promise. He was married to rising star Phyllis Isley, who would become the acclaimed actress Jennifer Jones. But their relationship ended in betrayal. David O. Selznick, the powerful producer who launched Jones's career, also stole her heart. This emotional rupture shattered Walker. Unable to cope, he turned to alcohol. Friends described his descent as swift and devastating. His drinking led to hospitalizations and public outbursts. His mental health deteriorated, and he struggled to hold on to acting jobs. Despite his brilliant turn in Strangers on a Train, he was deeply unstable. In August 1951, Walker suffered a mental breakdown. A psychiatrist administered a sedative. Tragically, it interacted fatally with the alcohol in his system. He died that night, at just 32 years old. The official cause was an accidental overdose, but in truth, it was the culmination of heartbreak, addiction, and unresolved trauma. Robert Walker's legacy remains a haunting reminder. Even brilliant talent can crumble in the face of unbearable pain. 3. Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift redefined Hollywood masculinity. With piercing eyes and raw emotional depth, he was the sensitive counterpoint to John Wayne's stoicism. A pioneer of method acting, Clift starred in classics like A Place in the Sun and From Here to Eternity. But his gift came with a price. Clift lived in constant emotional agony, dulled only by alcohol and pills. Born in 1920, Clift rose quickly in the 1940s. He refused to sign long-term contracts and chose roles with depth, setting a new standard for actors. But fame and personal turmoil soon collided. In 1956, after leaving a party at Elizabeth Taylor's home, Clift crashed his car into a telephone pole. Taylor found him unconscious, pulling his broken teeth from his throat to prevent him from choking. Though surgeons reconstructed his face, the accident left him disfigured and in chronic pain. His once golden image was marred. Clift turned to painkillers and alcohol to cope, and his career began to falter. Directors were wary of his unreliability, and studios distanced themselves. By the 1960s, Clift was a ghost of his former self, physically fragile, emotionally shattered, and creatively isolated. He died in 1966 from a heart attack at just 45. Montgomery Clift's descent was slow, painful, and public, an actor destroyed not by a single moment, but by years of agony masked in silence and substance abuse. 4. Barbara Payton. Barbara Payton was Hollywood's blonde bombshell. A starlet with sultry eyes, an electric screen presence, and a talent that could have taken her far. But her meteoric rise crashed into a devastating spiral of alcohol, scandal, and eventual destitution. She didn't just lose her fame, she lost her identity. Payton's career ignited in 1950 with Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye, opposite James Cagney. Her raw magnetism made her a studio favorite. But behind the scenes, her personal life was chaos. She became entangled in a violent love triangle with actors Franchot Tone and Tom Neal. Neal beat Tone nearly to death when he discovered Payton had rekindled her affair with him. The press devoured the scandal. Instead of retreating, Payton leaned into the notoriety. Studios blacklisted her, and A-list offers evaporated. By the mid-1950s, she was appearing in B-movies and fringe projects like Bride of the Gorilla. Unable to revive her career, she turned to work and petty theft. Her alcohol and drug use worsened. She was arrested repeatedly and lived in seedy motels. In a final attempt to reclaim some dignity, she published a memoir titled I Am Not Ashamed. It chronicled her fall with brutal honesty. But by then, she was unrecognizable, bloated, broken, and destitute. In 1967, Barbara Payton died of liver and heart failure at just 39. Once a symbol of screen allure, she became a tragic icon of wasted potential and Hollywood's cruel indifference. 5. Frank Sinatra, Frank Sinatra, Old Blue Eyes, was more than a singer. He was an icon, a legend whose voice serenaded generations and whose charm lit up the silver screen. But behind the tuxedos and timeless songs was a man fighting inner storms. Sinatra's relationship with alcohol was complicated. It fueled his bravado and destroyed his peace. Rising from humble beginnings in Hoboken, New Jersey, Sinatra took the music world by storm in the 1940s. By the 1950s, he was a double threat, conquering both the recording studio and Hollywood. He won an Oscar for From Here to Eternity and headlined films like The Man with the Golden Arm, a role ironically mirroring his real-life demons. Sinatra was known for his temper, his volatility, and his capacity for excess. He was a heavy drinker, and while he remained high-functioning for much of his life, alcohol shaped his worst moments: bar fights, public breakdowns, and outbursts that torpedoed relationships and business deals. His marriage to Ava Gardner, though passionate, devolved into violent, arguments fueled by booze and jealousy. He also ran with a dangerous crowd. His well-documented associations with mafia figures like Sam Giancana and Lucky Luciano led to FBI investigations. At one point, the Kennedy administration, originally friendly with Sinatra, cut ties with him over fears about his criminal connections. Though he managed a powerful comeback in the 1960s with hits like My Way and Strangers in the Night, Sinatra never quite outran the chaos. Friends recalled his later years as lonely, marked by declining health and reliance on alcohol to soothe old wounds. While he maintained his aura until the end, much of his fortune, friendships, and family stability were eroded by years of addiction. Sinatra died in 1998 at age 82. He left behind a complicated legacy, unmatched talent, unforgettable music, and a lifetime marked by battles he often waged in silence and shadows. 6. Veronica Lake, with her peekaboo hairstyle and enigmatic gaze, was once the face of film noir. A symbol of 1940s glamour, she starred in classics like This Gun for Hire and The Blue Dahlia, often alongside Alan Ladd. But behind that ethereal beauty was a woman tormented by alcoholism and mental health struggles that eventually drove her into obscurity. Born Constance Ockelman in 1922, Lake rose to stardom almost overnight. Her sultry look was irresistible to studios and audiences alike. Yet fame proved to be a curse. Known for being temperamental and difficult to work with, Lake's clashes with directors and co-stars became legendary. As the spotlight intensified, so did her drinking. By the late 1940s, her alcohol use began affecting her career. She showed up late to sets, forgot lines, and became unpredictable. Paramount, the studio that had once made her a household name, eventually dropped her. She attempted a few stage roles, but her reputation followed her, and offers dwindled. Her personal life was equally tragic. After multiple divorces and failed relationships, she found herself financially ruined. In a shocking twist, by the 1950s, she was discovered working as a barmaid at a rundown New York hotel. Few patrons recognized the once great movie star as she poured drinks and cleaned tables. Lake eventually penned a memoir titled Veronica, the autobiography of Veronica Lake, hoping to reclaim some dignity and confront the myths about her downfall. Though it garnered attention, it didn't restore her career. Her battle with alcohol continued to the end, exacerbated by mental health issues that were never adequately treated. She died of hepatitis and kidney failure in 1973, at just 50 years old. Veronica Lake's story is a stark reminder that Hollywood glamour is often a thin veil covering deep sorrow and unresolved trauma. 7. Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney was once the biggest star in the world, an unstoppable box office draw who earned millions, headlined classics, and starred alongside Judy Garland in beloved musicals. But despite a career spanning nearly 9 decades, Rooney's life collapsed under the weight of addiction, reckless spending, and betrayal. Born in 1920, Rooney began acting at just 6 years old. By the 1930s and 40s, he was a global sensation thanks to the Andy Hardy series. Studios loved his boundless energy and wholesome appeal, but behind the grinning face was a man plagued by vice. Rooney developed a crippling gambling addiction early in his adult life. He blew through staggering sums of money, betting on horse races, dice games, and cards. No matter how much he earned, he lost it just as quickly. He was also a heavy drinker during the height of his fame, and his personal life was chaotic. He married 8 times, many ending in scandal and financial ruin. Though he tried to stay in the public eye with roles in films, television, and even stage, Rooney was always chasing the life he had lost. By the 2000s, his situation had grown dire. He testified before Congress in 2011 about being a victim of elder abuse, claiming his stepson and wife had stolen his money and left him impoverished. When he passed away in 2014, at the age of 93, Rooney had an estate valued at just $18,000. The boy wonder who once out-earned Clark Gable and starred in over 300 films died with virtually nothing. His downfall was a cruel mix of addiction, financial mismanagement, and betrayal by those closest to him. Mickey Rooney's story is perhaps the most painful. A life filled with talent, longevity, and charm, ultimately undone by decades of unchecked habits and exploitation. 8. Bela Lugosi. Bela Lugosi made horror history as Count Dracula in 1931, but the actor who brought vampires to life was ultimately consumed by his own monsters. A Hungarian immigrant with stage experience, Lugosi had the voice, stare, and gravitas to terrify audiences. Yet behind the cape was a man trapped by addiction, typecasting, and crushing poverty. After the success of Dracula, Lugosi became a household name. But unlike his contemporaries, he was never offered roles that allowed for career growth. Studios pigeonholed him as a horror villain, limiting his prospects and income. He turned down the role of Frankenstein's monster, a decision that allowed Boris Karloff to eclipse him in fame and fortune. As the roles dwindled, so did Lugosi's finances. He worked job to job without long-term contracts or royalties. By the 1940s, he was struggling with chronic pain and was prescribed morphine. Addiction quickly followed. He later became dependent on methadone as well. His personal life disintegrated. Lugosi filed for bankruptcy in 1954, listing just $1,900 in assets and over $10,000 in debt. He was cast in ever-cheaper B-movies, most infamously Ed Wood's Plan 9 from Outer Space. He even publicly entered rehab in 1955, one of the first Hollywood stars to do so. Lugosi died in 1956 at age 73, penniless and broken. In a bittersweet gesture, he was buried in his Dracula cape, forever tied to the role that made and destroyed him. His life stands as a Gothic parable. A man who terrified millions on screen but was powerless against the real-life horrors of addiction and neglect. 9. Dorothy Dandridge. Dorothy Dandridge was elegance personified, a trailblazer in every sense. She was the first black woman nominated for a Best Actress Oscar for her role in Carmen Jones, 1954. She had beauty, talent, and charisma that could have defined a new era in Hollywood. But instead, she became one of its greatest tragedies, crushed by racism, heartbreak, financial ruin, and addiction. Dandridge's early career was marred by the roles available to black actresses, maids, chorus girls, and background parts. Carmen Jones changed everything. With that performance, Dandridge seemed poised to break every barrier. But after her nomination, Hollywood turned its back. Studios refused to cast her in leading roles unless they were degrading stereotypes. She declined them all. Her personal life offered no escape. She endured an abusive marriage with dancer Harold Nicholas, which ended in divorce. Her only daughter, Carolyn, was born with brain damage and required lifelong care. Supporting her daughter financially and emotionally drained Dandridge, especially as film offers dried up. Trusting the wrong financial advisors added to her decline. She lost her home, her savings, and eventually filed for bankruptcy in 1963. Depression and anxiety overwhelmed her, and she turned to alcohol and prescription medication to ease the pain. By 1965, Dandridge was living in near obscurity in a modest apartment. She died that year at just 42 years old from an overdose of antidepressants. Whether accidental or intentional, her death felt inevitable to those who had watched her spiral. Once hailed as a symbol of progress, Dorothy Dandridge died with barely a dollar to her name, forgotten by the industry she once inspired. 10th. William Holden. William Holden was the epitome of suave masculinity. His performances in Sunset Boulevard, Stalag 17 and Network earned him critical acclaim and cemented him as one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. But behind his rugged charm was a lifelong struggle with alcoholism, a demon that ultimately killed him. Born in 1918, Holden skyrocketed to fame in the 1950s. Directors adored his natural style, and audiences responded to his mix of stoicism and vulnerability. But by the late 50s, his drinking was no secret. He often showed up to sets intoxicated or disappeared for days at a time. Despite the erratic behavior, he delivered standout performances, making it easy for studios to look the other way. One of his most famous relationships was with Audrey Hepburn, whom he adored. But Holden's alcoholism made a lasting future impossible. Hepburn wanted children, and Holden, who had undergone a vasectomy and was deep in addiction, could not provide stability. As his career slowed in the late 60s and early 70s, Holden became reclusive. He traveled the world, drank heavily in solitude, and kept only a small circle of friends. In 1981, at the age of 63, he suffered a fatal accident while drunk. He slipped, hit his head on a nightstand, and bled to death alone in his Santa Monica apartment. His body wasn't discovered for days. Despite his success, Holden died isolated, a victim of silent addiction. His passing remains one of Hollywood's most haunting losses, a star who shined brightly but died in darkness. 11. Frances Farmer. Frances Farmer was once the epitome of talent and intellect in Hollywood. Strikingly beautiful and fiercely independent, she was destined for stardom in the late 1930s. But her rebellion against the studio system, combined with alcoholism and mental illness, led to one of the most tragic downfalls in showbiz history. Born in 1913, Farmer's rise was rapid. Films like Come and Get It, 1936, and Rhythm on the Range, 1936, showcased her skill and magnetic presence. But Farmer didn't play the game. She challenged studio contracts, spoke her mind, and refused to conform to the expectations of a submissive starlet. Her defiance came at a price. Branded difficult, she was blackballed from major roles. To cope with the mounting stress and isolation, she turned to alcohol. Her public behavior became erratic. Outbursts, drunken arrests, and court appearances followed. In 1942, Farmer's life unraveled completely. She was forcibly institutionalized and subjected to shocking abuses. While the full extent is still debated, records indicate she underwent electroshock therapy, solitary confinement, and possibly a lobotomy. These years of brutal psychiatric treatment destroyed much of her emotional and mental health. When released in the early 1950s, she tried to return to entertainment. She hosted a local TV show and took minor acting roles, but the industry had moved on. Her name evoked pity, not prestige. She spent the remainder of her life in obscurity, occasionally reflecting on her experiences, but never fully recovering. In 1970, Frances Farmer died of esophageal cancer at 56. Her story is not just one of addiction, but also of how Hollywood discards women who challenge its authority. She lost everything: her career, her autonomy, and nearly her sanity. 12th, Rita Hayworth. Rita Hayworth was the face of 1940s Hollywood glamour. With her fiery red hair, hypnotic dance routines, and unforgettable turn in Gilda, 1946, she became a global sensation. But behind the Technicolor beauty was a woman unraveling under the weight of addiction, trauma, and fading stardom. Born Margarita Cancino in 1918, Hayworth was pushed into performing by her demanding father. She trained rigorously as a dancer and eventually transitioned to acting. Her transformation into a screen siren came at a cost. She underwent painful electrolysis to change her hairline, dyed her hair, and was taught to erase her ethnicity to appeal to white audiences. She dazzled in hits like Cover Girl, 1944, and The Lady from Shanghai, 1947. But Hayworth's personal life was a string of failed relationships. She married 5 times, including to director Orson Welles and Prince Ali Khan, and each marriage ended in disillusionment. As her personal turmoil grew, so did her reliance on alcohol. By the late 1950s, her reputation was tarnished. Studios no longer courted her, and offers slowed to a trickle. Those close to her began noticing serious memory loss and erratic behavior. She was often dismissed as another aging starlet with a drinking problem. But in reality, Hayworth was suffering from early-onset Alzheimer's disease, undiagnosed and misunderstood at the time. Her condition worsened throughout the 1970s, yet the media continued to frame her as a washed-up alcoholic. She became increasingly reclusive, dependent on family and aides for care. Hayworth died in 1987 at age 68, with much of her fortune gone and her legacy clouded by decades of misinterpretation. In truth, she wasn't just undone by addiction. She was also a victim of misdiagnosis, misogyny, and the brutal neglect of a system that discarded her when she stopped selling fantasies. 13th, Dana Andrews. Dana Andrews exuded quiet strength on screen. With his calm intensity and commanding presence, he led acclaimed films like Laura, 1944, and The Best Years of Our Lives. But behind that composed exterior was a man struggling silently with a powerful addiction. Alcoholism that nearly destroyed his career, drained his finances, and ravaged his spirit. Born in Mississippi in 1909, Andrews had a humble beginning. He worked odd jobs before pursuing acting at the Pasadena Playhouse. By the early 1940s, he had landed a contract with Samuel Goldwyn and rose quickly in the studio system. His performance in The Best Years of Our Lives as a traumatized war veteran resonated deeply with post-war audiences. But even as his star rose, Andrews battled private demons. He became a functioning alcoholic, able to deliver strong performances on set while drinking heavily in private. For years, he kept his addiction hidden, even from those closest to him. But alcohol slowly began to erode his personal and professional stability. By the mid-1950s, his problem was impossible to ignore. His performances became inconsistent, his finances dwindled due to poor investments, and leading roles became scarce. Andrews turned to television and low-budget films to stay afloat. Unlike many others, however, Dana Andrews faced his addiction head-on. In the late 1960s, he got sober and began speaking publicly about his journey. He became one of the first major Hollywood stars to openly discuss alcoholism and recovery, even joining the National Council on Alcoholism to raise awareness. Though his comeback in the spotlight never fully materialized, Andrews regained a measure of peace in his final decades. He worked in real estate and spent time with family until his death in 1992 from pneumonia. His story is both tragic and inspiring, a tale of loss, accountability, and personal redemption. 14. Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn lived like a man who believed he'd never die. Dashing, daring, and perpetually intoxicated, Flynn embodied the swashbuckling rogue both on-screen and off. His performances in Captain Blood, 1935, and The Adventures of Robin Hood, 1938, made him a household name. But his off-screen indulgences, booze, drugs, scandal, ultimately left him penniless, broken, and a shadow of the hero he portrayed. Flynn was born in Tasmania in 1909, and before acting, he lived a life worthy of legend, sailing, gold prospecting, and adventuring. That wild streak followed him to Hollywood, where his charm and athleticism launched him into stardom. For over a decade, Flynn was Warner Bros.' crown jewel. But Flynn's drinking was infamous. He started his days with champagne and ended them in blackout. Morphine and other drugs later entered the mix. His womanizing and reckless behavior spawned scandals, including a statutory rape trial in 1942. Still, the damage to his public image was irreversible. As the 1940s faded, so did Flynn's career. He was visibly deteriorating, his once chiseled frame bloated, his energy dulled. He took roles in European B-movies to stay afloat. His extravagant spending on yachts, homes, and parties left him in mounting debt. Even his memoir, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, was an attempt to salvage his finances. In 1959, Flynn suffered a heart attack while trying to sell his yacht in Vancouver. He was only 50, but his autopsy revealed the body of an elderly man ravaged by cirrhosis and heart disease. He died nearly penniless, having lost everything to a life of unchecked excess. Errol Flynn remains a cautionary symbol, the man who lived as if consequence didn't exist, until it came calling. 15th. Alan Ladd. Alan Ladd was the quiet cowboy, the stoic assassin, the man of few words whose presence was louder than dialogue. His role in Shane, 1953, immortalized him as a Western legend. But in reality, Ladd was a deeply insecure man, haunted by his short stature, childhood trauma, and an ever-growing dependence on alcohol and painkillers. Born in 1913, Ladd grew up in poverty and emotional isolation. He tried various jobs before breaking into Hollywood, where his pairing with Veronica Lake in noir classics like The Glass Key and This Gun for Hire made him a box office sensation. Yet Ladd was never comfortable in his own skin. He stood just over 5 feet 6 inches, and studios went to great lengths to hide his height with camera angles and custom-built sets. By the 1950s, Ladd's internal struggles had worsened. Chronic pain from injuries and lingering depression pushed him toward alcohol and sleeping pills. He became increasingly reclusive, often battling bouts of silence and despair between film takes. His once reliable performances began to suffer. Ladd attempted a comeback with The Carpetbaggers, 1964, but by then he was physically and emotionally drained. That same year, he was found dead in his home from an overdose of alcohol and sedatives. He was only 50. Though ruled accidental, it was widely understood that his years of addiction had finally taken their toll. Despite his rugged screen persona, Alan Ladd's life ended in quiet tragedy. Alone, addicted, and painfully human beneath the tough exterior. 16. Susan Peters, new entry. Susan Peters was a rising star in the 1940s, beautiful, talented, and poised for greatness. Nominated for an Academy Award at just 21 for her performance in Random Harvest, 1942, she seemed destined to become one of Hollywood's great leading ladies. But a freak accident and subsequent descent into depression and substance abuse would change everything. In 1945, Peters accidentally shot herself in a hunting accident. The bullet lodged in her spine, leaving her permanently paralyzed from the waist down. Hollywood had no place for actresses in wheelchairs. The offers stopped. The studios turned cold. Though she attempted a brief comeback in wheelchair-bound roles and on television, she faced rejection and isolation. Her marriage dissolved under the pressure. Slowly, Peters slipped into severe depression. To cope, she turned to alcohol and refused to eat. Her health deteriorated, and by 1952, at only 31, she passed away from complications related to anorexia and kidney failure, widely believed to be the result of alcohol and willful self-neglect. The actress, who had once enchanted millions, was forgotten by the industry that once embraced her. Susan Peters didn't lose everything through fame's excesses, but through Hollywood's indifference to her pain. 17th Gig Young, new entry. Gig Young was the charming, dapper actor who won an Academy Award for They Shoot Horses, Don't They? He had wit, charisma, and an enviable career. But beneath the polished surface was a man plagued by severe alcoholism, untreated mental illness, and a darkness he could no longer outrun. Born Byron Barr in 1913, he took the name Gig Young from one of his early roles. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, he was a reliable supporting actor in romantic comedies and dramas. But behind the scenes, Young struggled with intense depression and addiction. He drank heavily, so much that studios began inserting clauses into his contracts requiring sobriety during filming. Despite occasional professional highs, his personal life was in chaos. Multiple failed marriages, erratic behavior, and rumors of violent outbursts followed him. By the 1970s, he was virtually unemployable. The Oscar that should have brought resurgence only deepened his descent. He felt like a fraud, celebrated on paper, shattered in real life. In 1978, just weeks after marrying actress Kim Schmidt, Young murdered her in their New York apartment before taking his own life. He was 64. The tragedy shocked Hollywood, but few were truly surprised. Those close to him knew the signs had long been there, ignored by a system that celebrated his performances, but ignored his cries for help. Gig Young's end was horrific, but it was also a symptom of a deeper issue, an industry that often glamorizes the exterior while neglecting the pain underneath. These 17 stars dazzled the world, but were undone by addiction, isolation, and a system that devours as easily as it rewards. Their stories are warnings, their downfalls preventable. Behind the fame was fragility. Let us remember not just their tragic ends, but the immense light they gave us, however fleeting. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more classic Hollywood deep dives.